That was their gift. That's CBS 4 News at 5:30.
Here's what's ahead on CBS 4 News at 6.
What went wrong? A new report providing answers about the chaos at the Fort Lauderdale airport during January's mass shooting. A woman facing her accused attacker in a Broward courtroom, all as jurors see explicit surveillance video that could make or break the case. Plus, the fight to eradicate cocaine trafficking intensifies. A search of the coca crop in Colombia threatening to put more drugs on our streets. We're getting a closer look at the effort to prevent that. CBS 4 News at 6 starts right now.
This is CBS 4 News at 6.
First at 6, a presidential news conference takes a controversial turn. On the day he hoped to get back to his agenda, President Donald Trump reignited debate over the terror attack and violence in Charlottesville, Virginia.
You had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit, and they were very, very violent.
In a press conference where he was set to talk about infrastructure, the president ended up forcefully defending his response to the unrest in Charlottesville, Virginia over the weekend. Here's a portion of what he had to say.
The driver of the car is a disgrace to himself, his family, and this country. And that is, you can call it terrorism, you can call it murder, you can call it whatever you want. I would just call it as the fastest one to come up with a good verdict. That's what I'd call it. Because there is a question. Is it murder? Is it terrorism? And then you get into legal semantics. The driver of the car is a murderer. And what he did was a horrible, horrible, inexcusable thing.
The president then challenged the reporters on the counter-protesters, referring to them as the, quote, alt-left. Here's what he said about that.
What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
Let
me ask you this. What about the fact they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, that was a horrible, horrible day. Wait a minute. I'm not finished. I'm not finished, fake news. That was a horrible day. I will tell you something. I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you have, you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit, and they were very, very violent.
Now, toward the end, the president's remarks turned to the efforts to take down Confederate symbols in different parts of the country. He was asked how far it would go.
George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, excuse me, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him?
I do.
Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly.
Now, the president pointed out the protest Friday night did not have any violence. Meantime, some of our members of Congress are weighing in on the president's comments. Congresswoman Ileana Layton tweeted just moments ago, quote, blaming both sides for Charlottesville? No. Back to relativism when dealing with KKK, Nazi sympathizers, white supremacists? Just no. Look for much more in-depth coverage of the president's remarks coming up on the CBS Evening News. It starts at 6:30 after this newscast, and you can watch the entire news conference on our website, cbsmiami.com. And now at 6, a new report is breaking down what went wrong after the mass shooting at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport in January. In pages after pages, investigators outlined the lessons learned from the chaos that ensued. Let's go live right now to CBS 4's Ted Scouten, who's been digging through the report. He joins us from Fort Lauderdale. Ted?
Yeah, Elliot, this was an 82-page report that breaks down everything that happened at the airport that day in January. It gives high marks for the initial response to that mass shooting and then finds some problems.
Stop firing deputies downstairs.
It's trouble like that, radio issues, that independent observers point to as problems that occurred during that mass shooting at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport in January. 5 people were killed and 6 injured after Esteban Santiago is accused of opening fire at baggage claim in Terminal 2. Then there was more panic with reports of more gunfire. It sent people running in all directions.
This was an escape. This was a mass escape. This was over 10,000 people running for their lives.
Observers found that radio trouble made it difficult for officers to communicate. The sheriff said he saw the same thing.
Only one person could speak on the radio at one time, and there were thousands and thousands of users that day, and spaghetti was turned into confetti. And
after interviewing 60 people involved in the response to the airport shooting, consultants said unified command never established, causing confusion as to who was in charge. The sheriff disputes that.
It was clearly unified command. The right hand knew what the left hand was going in.
We all saw the massive response from law enforcement. They showed up from all over, but the report found confusion there too. Up to 2,600 law enforcement officers from the region responded to FLL with no designated staging area. The sheriff and airport director say they will look at the 132 recommendations made in the report.
I'm taking those 132 recommendations not as an indictment that you had 132 failures, not by any stretch.
And the airport director went on to say he'll take those 132 recommendations as ways to improve for the future. Live in downtown Fort Lauderdale, Ted Scouten, CBS 4 News.
Ted, thank you for that. An increasingly bold Venezuelan government has issued a wanted list, arrest warrants, not for opponents in Venezuela, but for exiles from the country who have found shelter in other nations, including here in South Florida. CBS 4's Gary Nelson reports some on the wanted list are very nervous about this.
Patricia Palacio was watching Venezuelan state TV from her home in Broward when she was named as one of 23 Venezuelan exiles the Maduro regime once arrested, accused of inciting an attack on a government base this month. It's not the first time she says she's been falsely accused.
You were charged with treason?
Treason one time.
And another time, she was accused of conspiring to kill a government prosecutor.
I supposed to be the mastermind of the murder, you know?
The mastermind of the murder?
Yes.
As an investigative reporter in Venezuela, she angered the Chavez government for exposing ties to terrorist groups and narco-trafficking. She has a daily program on YouTube calling out the Maduro regime for its abuses.
My TV show is watching by millions of people every night, you know?
Huge ratings that hugely infuriate the Venezuelan government. The reason, she says, she's on an arrest list now, secure in the U.S., but
I can't go out of the country because I can be arrested.
So she stays home and watches her back, believing Maduro's regime is capable of anything. Indeed, Florida Senator Marco Rubio is under 24-hour guard after Homeland Security learned of an apparent Venezuelan assassination plot against him. Palacio likes President Trump's tough talk of possible military intervention in Venezuela, worried the opposition is rapidly being beaten down.
Inside, it's very hard to fight against that government.
A government enjoying a resurgence in support and hunting its opponents in exile. Among the exiles on Venezuela's wanted list, about 8 are safe in the U.S. The rest, though, are in other countries, some that may in fact honor Maduro's extradition requests. In the newsroom, Gary Nelson, CBS 4 News.
Right now, we are tracking the tropics tonight, and we continue monitoring Hurricane Gert in the Atlantic, and 3 other systems are showing potential for development. CBS 4 meteorologist Lisette Gonzalez is working the night shift. She's in for Craig Setzer. Hi, Lisette.
That's right. Nice to be with you the rest of the week. Elliot, good evening to all of you at home. Hurricane Gert is stronger, moving faster to the north-northeast. It's leading to rough surf and dangerous rip currents along the eastern seaboard, and it is a Category 1 hurricane and forecast to continue moving to the north-northeast into the cold waters of the northern Atlantic. It'll start weakening as we get into late Thursday and into Friday. In addition to Gert, 3 tropical waves in the Atlantic. The one in the far eastern Atlantic, it has a low potential development, so we have plenty of time to watch that. But let's start off with this area of low pressure over 1,000 miles east of the Lesser Antilles that has a 40% chance of developing, likely moving into the Caribbean as we head into the weekend. We'll have to wait and see. And then the wave behind it, several hundred miles west-southwest of the Cape Verde Islands, has a medium potential of development, and many of the models keep it moving towards the northern Lesser Antilles. And then, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty, but we'll have to closely monitor all these waves over the next coming days. I'll have the rest of the local forecast ahead.
Lisette, thank you. Look for the latest on the tropics anytime on CBS Miami's weather app. Remember, it's free to download on your smartphone's app store. New at 6, 2 years after a Hollywood woman says she was sexually assaulted in the parking garage of the Seminole Hard Rock Casino, she's facing her accused attacker in a Broward County courtroom. The defendant claims what happened was consensual. The jury will decide his guilt or innocence based on explicit surveillance video. CBS 4's Joan Murray is following the case. She has more from the courthouse in Fort Lauderdale. Joan?
Well, the jury has a lot to consider with this surveillance video. Mainly, did this defendant go too far?
This is a case about a sexual battery committed under a special circumstance.
Much of what happened between this woman and James Emilio, the man on trial for sexually assaulting her, is captured on surveillance. But a jury has to decide if Emilio went over the line.
Give James Emilio any indication that you are sexually interested in him. No.
The woman says she met Emilio, a bartender, 2 summers ago through a mutual friend. After beers and shots, she went with Emilio to the Hard Rock Casino, had a drink, but does not remember anything else until she woke up the next morning in the parking garage swarming with police.
I was really out of it and kind of disoriented and confused.
She was taken to a sexual assault treatment center.
They gave me other clothing.
Breaking down, reliving the ordeal.
Reaches out, grabs him, holds him, kisses him.
But Emilio is claiming nothing was forced. There's surveillance of the two leaving the casino, walking hand in hand, hugging at the elevator, embracing and kissing when the door is shut, and then spending several passionate minutes together in the hallway.
Mr. Emilio is here on trial simply for whether or not he and Miss Bishop engage in consensual sexual conduct.
But prosecutors say this is not consensual. The woman passed out, Emilio taking explicit cell phone pictures. In his own words, you hear Emilio talking about the pictures with investigators.
Think you took some inappropriate pictures of her? No, I don't think I did.
The case is really testing the boundaries of what is considered sexual consent, and the stakes are high. If convicted, Emilio is facing up to 30 years in prison. We expect to have a verdict tomorrow, and we'll bring it to you as soon as it happens. In Fort Lauderdale, Joan Murray, CBS 4 News.
Fascinating case, Joan. Thank you for that. There is more to come tonight on CBS 4 News at 6. The fight against cocaine trafficking is intensifying. A surge in the coca crop expected to bring a flood of the drug to the United States, and the Coast Guard and other agencies are scrambling to fight it. Plus, we're getting an idea of how one of the state's main sources of income is doing. A look at how many visitors the Sunshine State has gotten this year so far ahead.
The Finns take on the Ravens Thursday night at 7 on CBS 4.
Now at 6, we're getting a closer look at the effort to eradicate cocaine. CBS News got a special behind-the-scenes look at the work the men and women of the Coast Guard do to keep drugs off our streets. They're seizing millions of dollars worth, but issues with funding and equipment could soon jeopardize that mission. CBS 4's Manuel Bajorquez has the details.
It's got to be like watching an approaching storm. It is. I talk about it as really an approaching tsunami of cocaine getting ready to hit the global market.
Coast Guard Admiral Christopher Tomney is the director of Joint Interagency Task Force South, the Western Hemisphere's nerve center for tracking drug traffickers. It's based in Key West, Florida, where tourists visiting the island's famed southernmost point seem largely unaware of what's happening daily on the other side of the fence.
Definitely a lot of stuff in the boat. Looks like he might be dumping some more stuff here. Yep, one.
From here, an alphabet soup of government agencies, military branches, and 17 different nations work together to find, track, and target drug traffickers where they're most vulnerable.
Out on the high seas, when they're hundreds of miles away from shore, these traffickers have no place to run, they have no place to hide, they're out in plain sight.
These are the paths that are taken for these drugs moving into the United States and other parts of the world.
Absolutely. As you see where the lines get really thick, if you were to break this out, you're really talking thousands of events that we monitored last year.
How much of that are you able to stop?
Very little. 3 out of every 4 events that we have awareness of, we have no asset to go after.
They're getting through.
They're getting through. We need more ships. We need more aircraft is the bottom line.
Ships like the Coast Guard cutter James, which we visited on its way to the Eastern Pacific.
Our last patrol, we were able to bring 16 tons of cocaine back. It was worth about $420 million. Wow. Nearly enough to pay for this ship. And that was just in about a 45-day period. Now we're going to go into the Combat Information Center.
Captain Mark Fedor commands the most sophisticated ship in the Coast Guard's fleet.
We have a lot of different sensors that can tell us what's going on around us. So we'll issue the orders to launch the helicopter, to launch the small boats, and then we vector them into those targets.
That's one of the rounds that we use right there.
Armed helicopters are key to the end game, flying low alongside go-fast boats, many times at night, to shoot out the engines.
You can see on this side here the entry point where a sniper round has gone in, and this has been very effective technique.
But the smugglers have developed techniques of their own, like Bigfoot.
Bigfoot is what we term a self-propelled semi-submersible.
These low-profile semi-submersibles are harder to spot and carry tons more cocaine.
Probably a week does not go by that we don't have a report somewhere throughout the region of these types of vessels on the water.
Last year, the task force set an all-time record, stopping 285 metric tons of cocaine, but it's only a fraction of the total flow.
It's very frustrating for the men and women of this task force, knowing we could be doing so much more, but it really comes down to a series of choices. How much do we want to make this a priority?
Ultimately, their goal is to dismantle the trafficking networks, which can move anything, not just drugs. But because of aging ships and aircraft, the task force may have even fewer resources next year. From the U.S. Coast Guard base in Miami Beach, I'm Manuel Bojorquez for CBS 4 News.
Fascinating story right there about Manuel Bojorquez, who was in Key West, by the way. Lisette Gonzalez, what a nice place to be. Oh, look what you got behind you.
There you go, Elliot. Yeah, it sure looks like paradise, but boy, has it been hot. Dog days of summer in full force, but this is just a stunning view from our Key West camera. Don't you wish you could be down there enjoying that spectacular sunset, but at least we can bring it to you from our studios here in our cameras. Here's a view from our Fort Lauderdale camera. It was a scorcher today. Highs soared to the low 90s. 93 was a high in Miami, 92 in Fort Lauderdale, 90 in Key West. And this morning we woke up to lows in the 80s. We did have some spotty sea breeze storms earlier, and now the West Coast is getting slammed with lightning and some heavy downpours around Naples, Fort Myers. The breeze out of the east-southeast, 13 miles per hour, and it's 6:18 in the evening, and we are still in the 90s. 91 in Miami, 90 in Fort Lauderdale, 91 in Marathon. Temperatures are just not budging. When you factor in the humidity, it feels like the mid to upper 90s and the triple digits. So make sure you're cranking that AC, trying to stay in the shade, and plenty of water, staying hydrated here the next few days. We're going to continue with the stifling heat and tracking Hurricane Gert, which is stronger, racing to the northeast, leading to some rough surf and rip currents along the east coast. It is a Category 1 hurricane, and it is going to continue to move out into the cold waters of the northern Atlantic and start weakening by late Thursday into Friday. And we're watching 3 waves behind Gert. The one there off the coast of Africa has a low potential of development, but we'll begin with this elongated area of low pressure over 1,000 miles east of the Lesser Antilles that has a medium potential development. It is forecast to move into the Caribbean as we head into the weekend, and then a wave here several hundred miles west-southwest of the Cape Verde Islands has a medium potential development, and many models show it moving here. We'll continue to look at these computer models over the next few days very closely. Again, this first wave, it's likely moving into the Caribbean, maybe south of Cuba as we get into Sunday, and then we have this other wave which will likely be to the north of the Lesser Antilles by the weekend. For tonight, lows around 79, warm and muggy. For tomorrow, we'll see a low 90s with spotty afternoon storms and a similar pattern the next few days. A 30% chance of storms Friday, hazy sun. More storms around for the weekend. Elliott, highs continue in the 90s.
Lisette, thank you. More tourists are visiting the state of Florida. That's according to Governor Rick Scott, who announced the state's latest tourism numbers today. An estimated 60.7 million people visited Florida in the first 6 months of 2017. That's a more than 4% increase from the same period last year. A breakdown shows most of the increase is people coming from other states, and the number of visitors from other countries actually dipped slightly. Governor Scott has backed more funding for the state's tourism marketing agency, Visit Florida. And tonight in sports, Jay Cutler will play this Thursday for the Finns. That's the good news. The bad news, the team is dreading with more injury woes. Jim Barry has details after the break. Jim is here, and the start of the Jay Cutler era starts in 2 days.
And let's see what he's got, huh? You know what? I think this could be a really exciting and intriguing thing for the Dolphins. So let's see if I'm right. Yeah. Hey, the Dolphins say it's time for Jay Cutler to cut loose. It's official. He will start Thursday's preseason game against Baltimore. Adam Gase eases up on the reins a bit today, moving today's walkthrough indoors to escape the heat. D-lineman Lawrence Okoye looks pretty adept at all kinds of football, doesn't he? Hey, there's Jay Ajayi. He is out of concussion protocol. No word on if he's actually going to play Thursday. But as for Mr. Cutler, he is good to go against the Ravens. And teammates say so far he's been very easy to follow.
Cutler does a really good job of making sure everybody understands the way he wants things to go, and I think that's super important for the quarterback position. You know, we have to have the understanding of how he wants us to run the route, what he's looking for, and when and situationally. So he's done a really good job of coming in and letting us know, hey, this is what I expect.
Meanwhile, unfortunately, the injury bug bites again. Cornerback Tony Lippett tears his Achilles yesterday in practice. He is done for the season. Lippett got hurt in a non-contact drill, says head coach Adam Gase. Lippett last year started 13 games, led the team with 4 interceptions, and this season he was penciled in as at least the number 3 corner.
Anytime you lose a guy that was who started every game for you last year, it's not ideal. But that's why we've collected the depth we have, and that's why we're trying to get young players to go, because this is what happens.
Been a rough camp so far. While the more Giancarlo Stanton hits home runs, the more folks wonder if the Marlins can afford to keep him. Their slugger has smacked his way into the team record book. Friendly skipper Don Mattingly is happy that his team is quietly playing better baseball. And Stanton has become Paul Bunyan with a bat. Last night, his 43rd home run of the season helps power the Fish by San Francisco. They've won 4 straight now. And Stanton breaks Gary Sheffield's team mark for most homers in the season. Cause for another pie on the field and a beer shower in the clubhouse. And at least one teammate says Marlin fans need to appreciate this guy more.
Something that you really need to recognize, and giving I don't know, a curtain call, big round of applause. I feel like the community in Miami need to know what is going on and how hard it is to hit a homer like every day.
Looks pretty easy for him though. That's sports. More news right after this.
Finally tonight, the United States Army is one step closer to having its own museum. Today, crews moved in one of the biggest pieces. American troops used this Renault FT-17 to punch through German lines in World War I. France gave the 5 of spades to the United States. It's the only surviving tank of its kind known to have been used by Americans in the Great War. Right now, the Army is the only military branch without its own museum. The new Army Museum is set to open in Fort Belvoir, Virginia in 2019. And that's our news for now. Thank you for joining us. The CBS Evening News is next. Look for all day's headlines tonight on CBS 4 News at 11. These guys will be here. Yeah. And don't forget, you can always watch all our newscasts streaming live on our website, cbsmiami.com. It'll be here before you know it, Jim.
Got to come back.
That's right. Have a good night. And we get to work with Lisette.
Oh, yeah.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you guys.
I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it.
An angry President Trump returns to his original assessment of Charlottesville at an extraordinary news conference.
What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? You had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. I thought what took place was a horrible moment for our country, a horrible moment. But there are two sides to the country. This week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week, and is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
This is the CBS Evening News.
Good evening, I'm Anthony Mason. There was no script this time, no prepared statement. President Trump said today what he really believes happened in Charlottesville. Flashing anger at times, the president said both sides, the white supremacists and the counter-protesters, are to blame for the violence that left one person dead and 35 injured. We've never seen a presidential news conference quite like this one at Trump Tower this afternoon. White House correspondent Margaret Brennan was there. Margaret?
President Trump unloaded his frustration and defended his decision to wait 2 days before denouncing the hate groups behind that rally. He called it a horrible, horrible day.
I didn't wait long. I wanted to make sure, unlike most politicians, that what I said was correct, not make a quick statement. The statement I made on Saturday, the first statement, was a fine statement, but you don't make statements that direct unless you know the fact. It takes a little while to get the facts. If you go back to my, in fact, I brought it. As I said on, remember this, Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. And then I went on from there.
The president then doubled down on his assertion from Saturday that both sides were to blame for the violence.
You had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit, and they were very, very violent. Well, those people, all of those people, excuse me, I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. Those people were also there because they wanted to protest the taking down of a statue, Robert E. Lee. So, excuse me, and you take a look at some of the groups and you see, and you know it if you were honest reporters, which in many cases you're not, but many of those people were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. So, this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week, and is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
He condemned the driver who rammed his car into counter-protesters.
Well, I think the driver of the car is a disgrace to himself, his family, and this country. And that is, you can call it terrorism, you can call it murder, you can call it whatever you want. The driver of the car is a murderer. And what he did was a horrible, horrible, inexcusable thing.
Have you spoken to the family of the victim of the car attack?
No, I'll be reaching out. When will you
be reaching out?
I was I thought that the statement put out, the mother's statement, I thought was a beautiful statement. I always tell you, it was something that I really appreciated. I thought it was terrific, and really under the kind of stress that she's under and the heartache that she's under, I thought putting out that statement to me was really something I won't forget.
The mother of Heather Heyer, who was killed in Saturday's attack, thanked Mr. Trump for denouncing, quote, those who promote violence and hatred. But the president's frustration broke through when we asked about Republican Senator John McCain's call for him to denounce attacks by the alt-right on White House staff.
Senator McCain?
To the alt-right. And
Senator McCain, you mean the one who voted against Obamacare?
And he said
Who is Senator? You mean Senator McCain who voted against